Amazing. Hi, Anna. So
Hello.
I'm Nibras. I'm here with Anna. We're going to have another conversation in the humaning series. This one will be called Womaning. And so yes, a little shimmy, a little dance. So what I want to do is actually have a two-part conversation that's focused on, I think, classic femininity. And for this first conversation today, I wanted to focus on our direct lived experience. So I very intentionally tried not to do very much reading. I've tried to avoid talking to my friends who know a lot about this topic, and I just want to talk about our backgrounds and a few questions that I have. And then for the second part, I will go and do a lot of homework and a lot of reading, and I have a lot of friends who specialize in gender studies and kind of bring them in, and then we can have that conversation and compare and contrast. And so for a little bit of context why we're having this conversation, yes, first of all, why we're having the conversation, and then second of all, who we are, because I think our perspectives and our biases will definitely color the next 20 minutes. So just explaining some of that. So the why. At the moment, I'm really exploring femininity, and I'm really going through a process of, I guess you can call, reclaiming my own femininity. And it's interesting because I keep meeting a lot of people who do and who have quite a similar story. And I think when I was growing up, I really learned to shut down a lot of what is feminine in me because I grew up in a culture where that was seen as less than. And so a lot of my late teens to now have been like, no, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional. It's actually okay to be shy. Shyness is not a thing that needs to be beaten out of me. And so I wanted to talk to you about this, Anne. And when I messaged you about it, it's because I think you actually do a fantastic job of embodying the feminine, especially in a space like tech that very often asks you to forfeit femininity and punishes you at times, and discourages you for being openly feminine within the space. I've really seen a lot of extremes there, and you can tell me whether you agree or not later on. And I think another reason for the conversation is within this humaning series, I think womanhood and being a woman in the workplace, and for me, trying to reconcile being incredibly emotional with cutthroat environments and always optimizing for social cohesion with needing to be the best player in a team. Yeah, it's a lot of back and forth. So that's also something that I wanted to talk to you about. So yeah, think of it as a conversation about being a woman, work, success, emotions, and the other things that'll come up. So first question, and the second part of context is a little bit of who we are. And so my first question for you is, what does it currently, or actually more importantly, what did it mean to be a woman where and when you grew up?
That's a great question. So, hi everybody, I'm Anna. I'm the founder of the Interintellect, and biologically and in terms of my identification, a woman. And this is not something I often talk about, right? In my work, this is something that you're welcome to embody, or you're welcome to talk about certain aspects of it. But the experience as a whole is something that is kind of shrouded in mystery and is expected to stay. So I stayed there. I grew up in Budapest in Hungary, which is in East Central Europe, a non-Slavic country in Central Europe, former communist country, formerly part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and kind of a country with a lot of borrowed norms and borrowed customs from the surrounding empires or whoever happened to have colonized us in a particular century. And I think that confusion reflects in what kind of messages I was receiving growing up. And I see I'm going to be 37 in 2 months, which is kind of crazy. And I think I've spent most of my 30s trying to clear out this confusion. And not just in choosing between binaries in certain questions, but also in understanding when something, it really deep down is in a confused state, but we kind of put some kind of rule on top of it to mask it. right? We have so many things like that in how, men or women are supposed to be in a cis society, where we say, oh, it's like this. And then you kind of know that, yeah, but also the exact opposite of that is also true. So this statement cannot be true. It has to be more complicated. It has to be more, contextual. It has to be more dependent on the specific individual that we're dealing with. I'm thinking, like, who am I as a specific individual? What is my context? What are my contradictions, right? One of the beauties in its own weird and morbidly humorous way of being a woman leader is that you embody contradictions in so many ways when it comes to history or tradition, and you're forced to be dealing with it. It's basically your bread and butter every day to mitigate and to move through the maze of it, which I find quite weirdly entertaining. There are a lot of course there are a lot of challenges, but I think I'm very lucky that I got into this position at an age where I'm more comfortable with a lot of elements of my womanhood. So I just, waltzed around Silicon Valley with giant makeup and in a skirt, and I was like, deal with it. I wasn't in heels though, because I wasn't so sure. I knew it was a bit dangerous. I was like, if I had to run, I'm not trying to make a point here, but it was fantastic. I remember I was putting on my makeup on the BART in San Francisco, and which you do all the time when you're in London. Like, where do you do your makeup? On the tube, right? And everybody was watching, because apparently this is not what you do when you work in tech. Well, this is what I did, and I work in tech, so check your statement. But I also think it's because I'm dealing with so many other things. Like, I'm an immigrant, I'm a second, third language speaker, dependent on where I am. I age. So there are other things that I'm dealing with. So I don't spend nearly as much time thinking about my gender as I did when I was late 20s, early 30s, which is, I think, when, like, there are two moments in a woman's life when the horror of it kind of dawns on you: end of your teens and end of your 20s. And probably, like, when I will be end of my 30s, probably like another kind of horror will dawn on me. But I'm not sure. I think it gets better.
Okay, I have so many questions off the back of that. There's so many questions. So you said that you spent most of your 30s trying to clear up this confusion. What confusion were you clearing up, and can you give us like a summary of what that clearing up looked like and how it went?
I think my biggest source of confusion was that I come from a culture where feminine equals worse. And you're weaker and you're whinier and you bleed and they pull your hair and you scream. It's like really 50s dumb thing. But you're confined to it. And because I was a very nerdy, smart child, for me, problems were always like, okay, now let's solve it. And then they give you this giant problem, which is basically that you suck. This is the summary of the whole message, is that you are worse than a boy. And then when you try to exit from that territory that is demarcated by just generally sucking big time, then you're punished. Either directly, like there's a huge problem with physical or intrafamiliar violence where I come from, or very subtly, by losing your popularity, or girls in my class who were good at science, they didn't have any boys liking them, they didn't have the pretty girls wanting to be friends with them. Like, there are these very subtle ways of social violence where girls are kept within lines and girls also keep girls within lines, because that's the rewarded behavior. And I had a lot of behaviors, and I still do, that are just not rewarded where I come from. And I think, the kind of exhilaration I experience working in the US or working internationally, working in the Interintellect, of this openness and everybody rewarding these types of curiosities and first principles thinking that we do, I didn't experience this at all where I come from. There are a couple of archetypes of women that are found desirable, beautiful, lovable, acceptable. It's just like, I'm not in any of those categories, and it's just I'm sure that one day this will seem funny, but it did kept me up crying on many, many nights in my life where I was like, what's wrong with me? What I was wearing the skirts and I didn't speak and I was nice and I called the guy sir and I drank the drink I don't like because that's the drink for girls and I didn't swear and I was a good girl and they still don't like me. Why? Oh yeah, it's just because I, said that joke or whatever. I was like, quirky humor. And it was just like not rewarded, not for you. So I'm thinking like, I want to create an environment through my work where any person of any gender or any identification can just like be themselves. Like, no, like you don't have to fit into some kind of cookie cutter pattern. Like nobody cares. And it's interesting, like, some of my friends or people I knew growing up are now, divorcing and like meeting the limits of their own preconceptions. In the course of which they were discriminating against other people when we were growing up. And it's so sad. And you don't want to go there and say, I told you when we were 15 that this is not how, this is a made up rule. It doesn't matter. I have a lot of empathy, of course, toward people who are just realizing certain things now, because I am myself only realizing a lot of things now. And thank you and a lot of Interintellects for, bringing in all these incredible perspectives and experiences, because I'm learning from you every day, every single day, every hour.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of cross learning going on. I've picked up so much from people in II and from yourself as well. That's why it's cool to have these conversations. So another thing I want to go back to that you said earlier, again on contradictions, you said, you're being a woman leader means that you're constantly living with contradictions. And so that can be fun, but it can be stressful as well. So how have you developed tools for managing those contradictions? How do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis? Is it, like free writing and kind of enjoying the energy as it comes up? Where are you at with that now?
I think one of the things that really helped me dealing with the more difficult moments is that I know that there are a lot of people in the II who are younger than me or who are looking to me for advice. So, even in moments where if this was just something in my personal life, maybe I would be like, no, it's not worth the energy, or I'm not choosing this battle. I do choose the battle. And I'm like, no, we are going to talk about this and we are going to face this. And I hope to use my visibility and my more advanced age, to kind of show a good example, not necessarily with myself, but with how a certain situation turns out. So that's very important. And I think how we talk to each other, for example, in the community, and how equal different genders, backgrounds, generations are at Interintellect events, or in our forum. I think that's like a really good example. It gives people confidence, like, oh, we can actually talk to each other. I don't have to be worried. I don't have to have, necessarily all my defenses up. Otherwise, I talk a lot about how I think that human happiness arises primarily from embracing our own contradictions. And the moment when you understand that you kind of work both on the biological level, if you look at all the, the bacteria and whatnot that lives on and in us, this is the same for thoughts and our will. We are filled with these contradictory desires and ambitions, and then you kind of hope that in the democratic structure in this city, there is some kind of consensus or a good decision guiding the whole and keeping you on track. I think understanding that we have incredibly, opposing values and ideas about a lot of things helps us understand and accept these in other people. And the other person is no longer, a black and white situation in politics or in ideology or in whatever their opinion is. You see that, okay, this person says this, but I'm sure, as I always joke, like the atheist also screams, oh my God, when they step on a Lego, and they will not talk about it because it will not come up necessarily in that conversation, but just to know it, that in the good David Bowie stance, we are just taller children, and we want a lot of things that would seem insane written down, right? We want this, but also that, we want to feel safe, but we want to be free. We want to be loved, but we want to be left alone. We want to be understood, but we don't want to be known or predictable. We have all these things happening all at the same time. And you are probably somewhere on the spectrum, and there are wonderful, tests and ways to find out where your morals are or your politics are, but it's always a spectrum. And 90% of the people are not on the extreme ends of these. And I think this is how it feels being a man or a woman. There are parts of my life that I was just thinking this yesterday, because on Netflix, like yesterday was my free day, and I was on half of it. I spent it on Netflix, of course. And I'm getting this ad all the time for Emily in Paris. And I'm like, Netflix, this is so humiliating. Like, why are you, like, you clearly only advertise Emily in Paris to me because I'm a girl. Like, I haven't seen anything on Netflix that would qualify me for seeing this ad, right? I watch Camber's documentaries about wars and Big Bang Theory, right? That's what I watch. And then I was just laughing at myself, like, I have such a male taste when it comes to certain like television shows, and that's funny. In other things, I am the girliest person, traditionally girliest person you've ever seen, and will, I don't know, under any circumstances, will choose a ballet class over I don't know, anything where I have to stand in a goal and balls could be thrown at me. And I'm actually like, I had to do it because I went to school in Eastern Europe and we had to play ball games, and I was excellent at like jumping away from the goal to just let the ball go, because I was like, it was scary. So, and that's funny, and you're supposed to be laughing at yourself because, other people are like this as well, and they merit our sympathies, as opposed to being like, you're my husband and I married you because you were ABC and now you're D and E. How dare you? And like, who benefits from that, right? And I think that should be mutual and kind of just shared between everybody.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I've made a mental note to not have you on my team as a goalie if we ever do an II football game.
Okay, the thing that my friends learned is you have to infiltrate me into the other team if you want to win.
Perfect.
Just embed me and I will make your team soar.
Perfect. That's going to be the plan for sure then. Beautiful answers. I always like I like that stepping back that can happen sometimes. Like, I think in day-to-day living, like you said, we're all just made up of endless contradictions, and sometimes it's so easy to completely identify with one and then fight the other and then just switch back and forth. And every once in a while, it's quite nice to zoom out and realize that you can hold all of the contradictions. And actually, that's okay. That's an okay way to be. Like, you don't need to be resolved and reconciliated all the time. It can just, you can be human in that way. So yeah, that was nice to hear, and a good reminder, a very good reminder. So I think that you said earlier as well.
For those of you who don't know, actually Nibras here came up with the title humaning. So our entire series was named after the term that you coined, and I love that the title of this is humaning, womaning. And I hope that we will have the male version of this as well.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that would be quite cool. And we'll have a think as well about who will do that, who can host that one. So I'm thinking, I'm remembering again another thing that you said, which is a little bit scary for me, where you said there are like 3 points of really facing, or kind of what I think your words were, when the horror dawns on you in terms of what it means to identify as a woman, and to I guess come face to face with how confusing, and sometimes, like you've described in certain cultures, how unfair it can be. And the first is like late teens, and the second is late 20s, and then it'll continue, who knows. if you're comfortable, what were some of those experiences like for you?
Yeah, as you were talking about it, first of all, thank you so much for actually clarifying what I said so beautifully. So I think the realizations there are similar in the depth of the experience of going through them, but are very different in quality. I think the end of teens realization is more a realization of limitations, and the end of 20s is a realization of power. Both have good and bad sides, but they're very different. I think end of teens, so when you like 19, 20, some of your freedoms are wearing off. So the support of if you are in a, you know, a warm community at school and a warm community, a supportive community in your family, some of those little bubbles can shield you from the realities of the outside world, right? If you grew up in suburbia, you know, maybe your parents or a school bus takes you to bus in the morning, you don't have to deal with harassment. You know, if you, you know, if you stay where you grew up, then you have, you know, everybody, and you get a kind of respect that elsewhere a woman may have to start fighting for from zero, right? And I actually encourage people, like, go and do summer jobs, go and intern, like put yourself through more uncomfortable conversations and situations. Of course, nothing dangerous, but like, yeah, you have to meet the jerk at work because there are people like this. And you have to understand that, you know, it's not a rose garden. It's not for anybody, by the way, but it's a special kind of non-rose garden for a young woman, right? And there are all these arbitrary things, like you happen to be born somewhere in some age, and that locale and that time line will have its own beauty ideals, so you will be closer or further away from that, which is not really under your control. Some people are exactly what the beauty ideal is and they don't like it. Some people are extremely far away from it and they suffer from it. You know, for some people they are kind of in a comfortable Goldilocks zone there and they don't have to deal with it. But you have to also explore that. And on the other hand, end of teens is also an incredibly empowering moment in terms of like your sexuality, and like that you're at your most gorgeous in many ways, and all the fashion and the pop culture is made for you, and there's a lot of layers where you're in your element, and that's beautiful and you should embrace it, and that's amazing, right? And the safer and the more, you know, empowered the environment is for a girl, the more she can, you know, fill her up on these good experiences that propel us throughout our lives, right? That's when our taste forms. That's where a lot of the parts of our identities form. That's where we experiment with things. So I'm very like pro, you know, making that a safe experience. The end of 20s thing, I always tell people that nobody ever listened to me in my life when I walked into a room and started speaking until I turned 30. And I've always been the same me. I was super precautious. I literally had the same ideas ever since I was 5.
Yeah, can relate, definitely.
When you're 30, you say the same thing with the same tone, and suddenly people stop and listen to you. And I didn't understand, like, what the hell? I mean, it's amazing, but you suddenly feel so terrible for all the women who are younger. You know, and you see that in the Interintellect. So I train hosts that listen. For a woman, like all of the women participants at salons apologize if they spoke more than 30 seconds. And I'm just like, don't apologize. What you feel was a lot of time talking was 30 seconds. And all the guys spoke like 4 minutes, you know, and they didn't apologize. Just express yourself. Some women start speaking saying, I'm sorry. Like, no. I gave you the mic. I want to hear what you have to say. You know, you're an equal participant, and that's so important. And that's those things you learn. Sadly, at least I growing up in Eastern Europe. You know, I was born in the 80s. I learned that when I turned 30. But for me, it was also a super negative experience. in that, why did it take so long? What was I doing in my 20s? I felt really like between 30 and 31, I was very withdrawn and very angry at myself for having had allowed a lot of things to happen to me in my 20s and not standing up for myself, or feeling that some things were natural. I was, kind of demanding explanations of myself, like, why didn't I read more about this or that? Why didn't I take this or that seriously? But that might be also my type of person. So it's not necessarily everybody. I felt that I had failed myself, and that I'm very late in a lot of things in my career, because I could have just started doing this when I was 25. But I didn't really have the confidence until people actually stopped listening to me. And I don't know if this is, I'm a contractualist, so I believe that the responsibility is on both sides. But I still think that I could have been bolder. And then maybe now I would be wiser. I would have had maybe more transformative experiences at an earlier age. So if there's one thing I regret, is that I thought that the promised punishments for transgressing some lines was real, and it's not.
Yeah. I mean, though, going back to what you said earlier, we started off with context and social context. If you grew up in an environment where actually the repercussions were real in many ways, right? So your learned reaction, your brain, your body that believe that if you do act out, if you are bolder, if you do claim more, there will be punishment, aren't entirely wrong. Maybe just they didn't realize that you were in a different environment now. But I find that's the way these things tend to be.
And it's very manipulative, right? Because it's not, there's this fantastic line in an economics paper from a couple of years ago, where they look at how parents subconsciously invest more time and energy into the education and professional advancement of girls, because they think that the girl will fall out of the job market anyway and will end up making less money. And in the very kind of rational layers of thinking of parents, even when they really love the daughter, they invest more in the boy because they think that the return on investment will be much higher, because the boy will not fall out of the market for like 2, 3, however many child he has, right? And this was like this a little bit for me and my environment. And I find that very sinister. And it made me super sensitive to this, which is that we were not punished. There are very violent, dirty things going on in Eastern Europe, but for this particular thing, it's not a direct punishment. It's that you are given so much, you have it so well because you don't have to do anything. Why are you ungrateful? And to me, like, my family was relatively rich in the 90s. Like, we were this nouveau-riche post-communist show business family. And then from the 2000s, we went super bankrupt. But I wasn't allowed to change that, because you were supposed to be grateful for what you're given. So I know that this doesn't really depend on the wealth.
What weren't you allowed to change?
So for example, I was allowed to drive a car that belonged to somebody in my family, but it was, parts of it were broken, and you could hear that the brake was really bad. And I was like, I'm going to die in this car. But I wasn't allowed in a situation where I would have my own money to fix it when I was like 21. And I was actually on student loan because my family so didn't have money. But you were not supposed to voice that because you're a user of the world, not the builder of the world.
Right.
And I remember I was like, these people are going to like I'm in danger physically, literally, in this car. And in every curb you hear it screeching and it's not normal. But I can either use it or leave it there. And I ended up just leaving it there and taking the bus.
Good.
And to me, this is like something was like not, and there are some families in Hungary that are wonderful and great, but I happened to be born into one that exhibited some of these typical behaviors. And And I still think about it because I can't say like, oh, they didn't love me. It's more like there is something about the culture where who is allowed to question what and say what and use what. And it's just, it's like buying love with silence in many ways. And if you know me, I'm very talkative. So this was not
You
an
are.
ideal scenario.
You are. Buying love with silence. Yeah, like you said that, and my eyes automatically closed because that really hits home in so many ways, right? It's yeah, be silent, don't cause any disruption, accept what's given, and like you said, don't act on the world, receive the world, and flow with the world.
Is like anything you do to change the world that you were given means you're ungrateful.
Yeah,
If what you're given is horrible, just changing, wanting to signaling that you're not perfectly happy with it hurts somebody.
yeah,
And to me, that was the most stifling, suffocating thing. And it took me a very long time to understand it and break out of it. But I broke out of these things very drastically. So the only way I could distance myself from some things is like, I distance myself.
right.
I'm like, I live elsewhere, I do something else. You know, it had to be very drastic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Same for me. I did very similar things. It was, yeah, it was as soon as I was old enough to, it was like, okay, let's move out. And then let's now, start, yeah, just start rebuilding from the foundation upwards. So definitely relate to that. Okay. So all right, let's jump up the timeline then. And for your last 2 minutes, so I really love that you were in Silicon Valley in your makeup and in your skirts, and looking fabulous as always. I really like to.
I was wearing like the uniform of the denim jacket and the striped t-shirts. Like I was trying to fit in, but I was like, I'm not going to fully, transform because it's part of my identity that I am a woman and I enjoy it.
Yes.
and I would feel very uncomfortable, lying with my appearance anywhere.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So then maybe the question isn't relevant, but maybe it is. If it is, answer it. And so I was curious, especially with the context that you grew up in, how you'd gotten to that point where you could walk into Silicon Valley or walk into Silicon Valley, but you could be in that space and you could say, well, yeah, I choose to show this part of my identity and I choose to play with, well, identifying as a woman and showing it and be very comfortable doing that, when I think a lot of people do feel pressure, right? And okay, that I'm not supposed to be that, so I'm not going to do it.
I'm going to answer, and this is going to raise a lot of questions. So this is a teaser for the next episode, okay?
Perfect.
Just to clarify. So when I was growing up, I thought I would be a wife. And I wanted, because I knew myself, I knew I was very bookish. I thought I'm going to be a super smart, very entertaining wife that you can like put down somewhere with all the knives, I can use them and talk about Schopenhauer and Wagner and whatnot, right? That was my goal. And I always thought that as a woman, you're only supposed to, if you want to be lovable and desirable, you can only acquire enough knowledge that is shareable. So it's conversational knowledge. Like you have to be a good companion, right? And I always stopped kind of subconsciously where I felt that this would be too much and nobody would be interested, or it would be not verbalizable, geometrical knowledge or metaphysical knowledge, or even things that are way beyond this, psychedelic experiences. And then I remember I was like 20, 21 was when this kind of threshold was passed. And I knew that it had happened. And I knew that it was like, I'm in territory that is that is mine. And this is no longer about like raising my own social status. And by the way, I was not like a super popular kid in school. So this is not like I was the pretty girl and whatnot. I was sitting with a book. But I thought that at some point in my 20s, I'm going to, that the way I'm going to be taken out of my family will be through a guy, right? Like I think a lot of women, young women think that, right? I didn't think that this was something that that I'm going to build my own social status and my own place in society and my own utility to society myself. I did not think that at all. That's why I ended up studying philosophy of art and linguistics and stuff like that, because I was just like building my brain. I was not really looking to be economically useful in the world. And then gradually this, between 21 and 31, this other side of me started building up very strongly. And I always said that I have a double life of an intellectual. Like, I put on the skirt and I go in my heels in Budapest, and I'm like very, I was working in like NGOs and this project, and was a journalist and translator, and it was very entertaining. But underneath, I felt that this kind of monster is brewing and growing, and it's there, and it wants to act, and it knows what to do, right? But it was secret. And even my close friends, I didn't tell anybody that I actually want to affect the world and not just be meta, which is like I affect the man, or I affect my students or my readers, that actually want to go and sit behind the wheel. And I remember there was like a moment in 2016, before I started my first startup, where I felt that I'm both not only ready, but like bursting with this. And also the world was deteriorating in a way that I felt I have no excuse. Like nobody gives a damn what Anna Gát is going through. Like everybody has to go now and do what they're good at, because the world is going to like tailspin. Everybody is needed. And I just put aside my entire personal history and where I was from, what I studied. Nobody cares. Just get, if you can contribute, get at the wheel, everybody to arms. This is real. This is not a drill. And I remember where I was when I thought this, and I went and bought a domain, and I started my first company, which kind of through many iterations became the Interintellect. And at first it was really strange to sit at the wheel and saying like, no, I can actually like build a world, because it's needed, because we have to create alternatives now if we want to have good public discourse, good science, good education, smart people who want peace and equality in the world. Then we have to build those things so that these machines in culture, so it exists. And I was like, oh, I will do it as well. I will calibrate it so it's within my limitations and my little human person. But we all have to do this now. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, how you look, what's your background or generation or gender. Just if you strongly believe in something and you have everybody has some kind of skill set to employ for this purpose, just do it. If you don't want to do it alone, that's fine. I did it alone because I was ready when I was 32. Most people are happier and more productive and useful just joining the movement of somebody else. That's also fine, but not doing either, I think, is a waste. Whoever you are.
Okay, that's definitely an incredible teaser to end on. Very, very strong. Anna, pleasure talking to you as always. Thanks for being very honest and very open.
And you're a much better interviewer than myself. You have to do this from now on.
Not at all. You're a great interviewer. But honestly, you were so open and honest. It's really lovely.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to both the Manning, the Manning series. There is a footballer called Manning. No, we should start with him.
We'll try and make it happen.
And then we can also do the follow-up for this at some point. Thank you so much, Nibras.
Absolutely.
Lots of love.
To you as well.
Bye-bye.